The crack of a pistol echoed through the dusty streets of Lewiston, Idaho. As Emma Keller pressed her back against the wooden storefront, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild Mustang. The year was 1878, and at 20 years old, she had just overheard her stepfather's most horrifying plan yet to auction her off to the highest bidder at the town square tomorrow morning. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dirt road as Emma fought back tears. After her mother's death 6 months ago, life with her stepfather and his 2 sons had become unbearable. They treated her like property, and now they planned to profit from her as if she were nothing more than livestock. "Thought I told you to stay in that house," Jacob Keller's voice slurred behind her, the stench of whiskey hanging heavy in the air. Her stepfather swayed slightly, his ruddy face twisted in a cruel sneer. "Got a lot of interest in you already, girl. Mayor Wilson's offering a fair sum, but old man Peters might outbid him yet." Emma's stomach churned. Mayor Wilson was nearly 60 with a reputation for cruelty toward his previous wives, and Henry Peters owned the saloon where girls worked in conditions not much better than slavery. "You can't do this," Emma whispered, finding her voice despite her fear. "It's not legal," Jacob laughed, a harsh sound that scraped against her ears. "Legal? I'm your guardian, girl. Till you're wed, you do as I say. And tomorrow, you'll bring this family the money we deserve after putting up with you all these years." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh as he dragged her back toward their small house at the edge of town. Emma stumbled along, mind racing desperately for a plan of escape. The house had been her mother's pride, but since her death, it had fallen into disrepair, much like Emma's hope for a decent future. Inside, her stepbrothers Tom and Bill lounged at the kitchen table, counting coins and discussing her fate as if she weren't even present. "Mayor's offering $50, Tom said, his lips curling into a grin that made Emma's skin crawl. "Peters'll go higher," Bill countered. "He's always looking for pretty faces for that saloon of his." "I'm not property to be sold," Emma said, her voice stronger than she felt. All 3 men laughed, and Jacob shoved her toward the small back room that had once been a pantry before becoming her sleeping quarters after her mother died. "Get some rest. Want you looking fresh for tomorrow's bidding," Jacob said, closing the door and sliding the exterior bolt into place. Emma sank onto her small cot, tears finally breaking free. Her mother would be heartbroken to see what had become of their family. She glanced at the small window high on the wall, too small for escape. She'd already tried. Her gaze fell on the worn leather satchel beneath her bed, packed with her few precious possessions and hidden there weeks ago when she'd first suspected Jacob might try something like this. Sleep evaded her as the night stretched endlessly. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jacob and his sons drinking and planning how to spend their windfall. By dawn, Emma had dried her tears and steeled her resolve. If she couldn't escape, she would face whatever came with dignity, as her mother would have wanted. The morning brought commotion to Lewiston as word spread about the auction taking place in the town square. Emma was forced into her mother's best dress, a faded blue cotton that had once been beautiful, and marched through town like a prisoner to execution. A small crowd had gathered in the square. Some townsfolk looked uncomfortable, others curious, while men like Mayor Wilson and Henry Peters stood at the front, eyeing her appraisingly. Emma kept her chin high despite her humiliation. "Gentlemen," Jacob called out, pushing Emma forward. "As you know, I'm offering my stepdaughter's hand in marriage to the highest bidder. She's 20 years old, healthy, can cook and clean, and ain't bad to look at neither." He gestured to Emma like she was a prized mare. "Starting bid is $30, 40. Called Mayor Wilson immediately, his watery eyes roaming over Emma in a way that made her want to scrub her skin raw. "45, countered Henry Peters, chewing on a toothpick. Emma scanned the crowd desperately, looking for anyone who might help, but the few women present turned their eyes away in shame or pity. The sheriff was nowhere to be seen, likely paid to stay away. $50, came another voice, and Emma felt sick as the butcher's son raised his hand, a young man known for his hot temper. 60, shouted Mayor Wilson. "65, Peters said, looking bored as if buying human beings was an everyday occurrence. 70, came a new voice, deep and unfamiliar. The crowd parted slightly, and Emma saw him for the first time tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty black hat and a weathered duster. He stood apart from the others, one hand resting casually on his gun belt. His face was partially shadowed by his hat, but she could see his jawline was strong, covered in a few days' worth of stubble. 75, Mayor Wilson countered, looking annoyed at the newcomer. 80, the stranger said calmly. Jacob's eyes gleamed with greed. We've got $80. Do I hear 85, $100? The stranger said before anyone else could speak, his voice carrying across the square. A murmur ran through the crowd. $100 was more money than many folks in Lewiston saw in months, Mayor Wilson sputtered. 110. 200, the stranger countered without hesitation. The square fell silent. Even Jacob seemed stunned. Emma stared at the stranger, wondering what kind of man would pay such a sum and what he would expect in return. $200 going once, Jacob said, recovering quickly. Going twice. 250, Peters said suddenly, his face flushed with determination. The stranger stepped forward, and for the first time, Emma could see his face clearly. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps late 20s, with intense gray eyes that held hers for a brief moment before turning back to Jacob. $300, he said firmly. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Even Peters shook his head, unwilling to go higher. Jacob's face split into a greedy grin. 300 going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the black hat. Emma felt faint as Jacob pushed her toward the stranger, his hand already extended for payment. The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch, counting out the money with deliberate slowness before handing it to Jacob. She's all yours, Jacob said, practically salivating over the cash. No returns. The stranger nodded once, then turned to Emma. Up close, she noticed a scar running along his jawline and the way his eyes seemed to take in everything around them with careful assessment. Name's Matthew Garrison, he said quietly, tipping his hat slightly. And you're free to go, Miss Keller. Emma blinked, certain she'd misheard him. What? I said you're free to go. I didn't buy you. I paid to free you. Jacob stepped forward, his face reddening. Now wait just a minute. Matthew's hand moved to rest casually on his pistol. The transaction's complete. The lady is free to make her own choices now. But that's not how this works, Jacob sputtered. It is today, Matthew said, his voice low but carrying a clear warning. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Matthew turned back to Emma. Miss Keller, you're welcome to go wherever you please. If you need assistance leaving town or finding somewhere safe, I'd be happy to help. Emma stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. After months of being treated like property, this stranger had spent a fortune just to set her free. It made no sense. Why? She managed to ask. A shadow of something pain perhaps crossed Matthew's face. No person should be bought or sold, not ever. Jacob had recovered from his shock and moved toward them, his face contorted with rage. Now see here, the matter's settled, Matthew said, his tone indicating the discussion was over. Miss Keller, do you have belongings you wish to collect? Emma nodded, still stunned. Then I'll escort you to retrieve them, Matthew said, offering his arm in a gentlemanly gesture that seemed strangely at odds with his weathered appearance. As they walked away from the square, Emma could feel the stares of the townspeople boring into her back. Jacob and his sons followed at a distance, clearly furious but unwilling to challenge the armed stranger. Thank you, Emma finally said as they approached her stepfather's house. But I don't understand why you'd spend so much money to help someone you don't know. Matthew's expression remained carefully neutral. Let's get your things first, then we can talk. Inside the house, Emma quickly grabbed her hidden satchel from beneath the bed, grateful she'd had the foresight to prepare it. She added a small photograph of her mother and a worn book of poetry, her only real treasures. When she emerged, Matthew was standing in the main room, seemingly relaxed but positioned in a way that kept both the front door and Jacob and his sons in his line of sight. That's all, he asked, nodding at her small bag. Yes, she replied. There was nothing else here she wanted to take. Where will you go? Jacob demanded. You've got nowhere. No one will take you in. Emma lifted her chin. I'll manage. Matthew's gaze swept over the three men. Miss Keller is free to make her own decisions now. I suggest you gentlemen remember that. Outside, Emma breathed deeply, savoring the sensation of freedom despite her uncertainty about what came next. There's a stage leaving for boys this afternoon, Matthew said as they walked away from the house. I can purchase you a ticket if you'd like. Emma hesitated. I have some money saved, not much, but enough for a ticket, but I don't know anyone in boys. I know good people there who could help you find work, Matthew offered. They reached the main street where curious onlookers still watched them. Emma felt exposed, vulnerable under their scrutiny. Why did you do this? She asked again, stopping to face him directly. Matthew's expression softened slightly. 4 years ago, my sister was in a similar situation. Different town, different circumstances, but the same cruel intention. No one helped her. His jaw tightened. I wasn't there to stop it. Since then, I've made it my business to intervene when I can. The pain in his voice was raw, and Emma understood he wasn't sharing the whole story. What happened to your sister? She asked gently. Matthew looked away, his gaze distant. She didn't survive the man who bought her. By the time I tracked them down, it was too late. Emma's heart ached for this stranger who had saved her from a potentially similar fate. I'm so sorry. He nodded once, then seemed to shake off the painful memories. The offer stands ticket to boys, introductions to people who can help. Emma considered her options. She had exactly $6.42 hidden in her satchel, her entire life savings. It wouldn't last long anywhere. But the thought of going to another strange place with no connections was terrifying. Is there work in Lewiston? She asked. Now that I'm free, I need to support myself. Matthew studied her for a moment. Town like this, after what just happened, folks have long memories and loose tongues. It might be easier to start fresh somewhere else. He was right, Emma realized. The way people were looking at her now, some with pity, others with something worse, made it clear that staying in Lewiston would be difficult. I have a small ranch about 10 miles outside town, Matthew said, seeming to come to a decision. My housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, has been looking for help. It would be honest work with fair pay and a roof over your head until you decide what you want to do next. Emma hesitated. Going to a stranger's ranch outside town could be as dangerous as staying in Lewiston. Yet something about Matthew Garrison made her inclined to trust him. Your housekeeper, she lives there too? Emma asked cautiously. Matthew nodded. Mrs. Holloway's been with me since I bought the place 2 years ago. She's a proper chaperone, if that's your concern, and the bunkhouse for the ranch hands is a good distance from the main house. It was a better offer than Emma had hoped for. If she truly needs the help, I'd be grateful for the opportunity. She does, Matthew confirmed. She's been complaining for months that the house is too much for one person to manage alongside cooking for the ranch hands. Then I accept, Emma said, making her decision. Thank you, Mr. Garrison. Matthew, he corrected gently. If we're to be employer and employee, we might as well use our given names. Emma, she offered in return, though he already knew her name from the auction. My horse is at the livery, Matthew said. I'll get him and the wagon I brought to town. Meet me in front of the general store in 30 minutes. You might want to purchase any supplies you need. Emma nodded, relieved to have some time to collect herself. As Matthew walked toward the livery, she headed for the general store, feeling the eyes of Lewiston's residents following her every step. Inside the store, Mrs. Taylor, the proprietor's wife, regarded her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. Heard what happened in the square, Mrs. Taylor said as Emma selected a few essential items: soap, a hairbrush, and a small bottle of rose water that was her one indulgence. That Garrison fellow paid a pretty penny for your freedom. Emma kept her expression neutral. Yes, he did. Do you know him, Mrs. Taylor asked, making no effort to hide her interest as she wrapped Emma's purchases. No, Emma admitted, but he's offered me a position at his ranch working for his housekeeper. Mrs. Taylor raised her eyebrows. Matthew Garrison's ranch, eh? Been in these parts about 2 years now. Keeps to himself mostly, but fair in his dealings. Runs a decent cattle operation. She leaned closer. Some say he was a lawman once, or maybe even an outlaw. Hard to tell with the quiet ones. Emma paid for her items, unwilling to engage in gossip. He seems honorable to me. Well, be careful all the same, Mrs. Taylor advised. Man doesn't spend $300 without expecting something in return, if you take my meaning. Emma straightened her shoulders. He spent it to right a wrong, Mrs. Taylor. Sometimes people do things simply because they're right. She left the store with her small package, hoping her confidence wasn't misplaced. Standing on the boardwalk, she watched the dusty main street of Lewiston and wondered if she'd ever return. Despite living here most of her life, she felt no attachment to the town where neighbors had stood by and watched as she was auctioned like cattle. True to his word, Matthew appeared 30 minutes later, driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 bay horses. He stopped in front of the general store and offered Emma a hand up to the seat beside him. "Ready?" he asked simply. "Yes," she replied, settling her satchel and package at her feet. As they drove through town, Emma felt both relief and apprehension. She was leaving behind the only home she'd known, heading to an unknown future with a man she'd just met. Yet somehow, it felt right. They had barely reached the edge of town when the sound of galloping hooves approached from behind. Matthew tensed, his hand moving toward his gun as he pulled the wagon to a stop. Jacob Keller and his sons rode up alongside them, their faces flushed with anger and alcohol. "Think you're clever, don't you?" Jacob spat, his eyes fixed on Emma. "Running off with your fancy buyer." "The transaction's complete, Keller," Matthew said calmly. "You got your money, now move along." Bill Keller, the older stepbrother, sneered. "Maybe we're not satisfied with the deal anymore. Maybe we want her back." Matthew's voice remained level, but Emma noticed how his posture shifted slightly. That would be unwise. Tom, the younger brother, reached toward his hip where a pistol was holstered. "There's 3 of us and one of you, mister." In one fluid motion too fast for Emma to follow, Matthew had drawn his gun and cocked it. "That math doesn't favor you as much as you think." The tension stretched taut between them. Emma held her breath, painfully aware that violence could erupt any second. Finally, Jacob spat in the dirt near the wagon wheel. "Keep her then, she ain't worth the trouble," he turned his horse. "Come on, boys." The 3 men rode back toward town, Jacob turning once to shout, "Don't come crawling back when he's done with you, girl." Matthew holstered his gun and picked up the reins again. "Sorry about that," he said, as if they'd merely encountered a minor delay. "Are they likely to cause more trouble?" Emma asked, her heart still racing. "Not if they're smart," Matthew replied. "But it confirms that leaving Lewiston is the right decision for you." They traveled in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon soothing Emma's frayed nerves. The landscape opened up around them, rolling hills giving way to pastureland and stands of pine trees as they followed the winding dirt road away from town. "Have you always lived in Lewiston?" Matthew asked eventually. "Since I was 8, Emma replied. "My mother and I came west after my father died. She married Jacob when I was 12. She hesitated, then added, "She passed 6 months ago, consumption." "I'm sorry," Matthew said, and there was genuine sympathy in his voice. "Losing a parent is hard. What about you?" Emma asked, curious about this man who had so dramatically altered her future. "Where are you from originally?" "Missouri," he answered. "Left home at 17, worked cattle drives in Texas, did some scouting for the Army. Spent time in Colorado and Montana before settling here." His life story was delivered in the most economical way possible, revealing little of substance. "And now you're a rancher," Emma observed, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "Now I'm a rancher. Not a bad life, all things considered." As they crested a hill, Matthew pointed ahead. "That's the ranch, just in that valley." Emma followed his gesture and saw a sprawling property nestled in a valley between 2 gentle slopes. A sturdy 2-story farmhouse stood at its center, with a large barn and several outbuildings nearby. Fenced pastures stretched into the distance where cattle grazed peacefully. It was larger and more prosperous looking than she had expected. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "It's home," Matthew replied simply, but she heard the pride in his voice. As they approached, Emma noticed a plump, gray-haired woman emerge from the house, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. This must be Mrs. Holloway. Several men ranch hands presumably paused in their work to watch the wagon's arrival. Matthew pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down, then offered Emma his hand. She accepted his help, suddenly nervous about meeting her new employer and the other ranch residents. "Mrs. Holloway," Matthew called, "this is Emma Keller. She'll be helping you with the house, if that arrangement still suits." The older woman approached, studying Emma with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "About time you hired some help, Mr. Garrison. This place is too much for one person to manage properly." She extended a work-worn hand to Emma. "Martha Holloway, welcome to Garrison Ranch." Emma shook her hand, relieved by the woman's straightforward manner. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. I'm grateful for the opportunity." "Can you cook?" the housekeeper asked bluntly. "Yes, madam. My mother taught me well." "Can you clean without leaving dust in the corners?" "I can." "Do you complain when there's work to be done?" Emma stood taller. "No, madam." Mrs. Holloway's stern expression softened slightly. "Then we'll get along fine. Come inside and I'll show you where you'll sleep." Matthew picked up Emma's satchel. "I'll bring this in for you. Need to speak with Mrs. Holloway about some matters anyway." Emma followed the housekeeper into the farmhouse, taking in her new surroundings. The interior was simply furnished, but well-maintained polished wooden floors, solid furniture, and clean surfaces throughout. It was larger than any house Emma had lived in before. "This is the main sitting room," Mrs. Holloway explained, gesturing to a comfortable space with a stone fireplace. "Dining room through there, kitchen beyond it. Mr. Garrison's study is that door on the right off limits unless you're cleaning it when he's not there." They climbed the stairs to the second floor, Mrs. Holloway continuing her tour. "Mr. Garrison's room is at the end of the hall. Mine's here on the left. You'll have this one." She opened a door to reveal a modest but pleasant bedroom with a single bed, dresser, and small table with a wash basin. A window overlooked the front of the property. "It's lovely," Emma said sincerely, touched by the simple luxury of having her own private space after months in the converted pantry at her stepfather's house. "It's not much, but it's clean," Mrs. Holloway said. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall. We have indoor plumbing, which is Mr. Garrison's one real luxury around here." Matthew appeared in the doorway with Emma's satchel, which he placed carefully on the bed. "Is everything satisfactory?" "Yes, thank you," Emma replied. "Good," he nodded. "Mrs. Holloway, could I speak with you for a moment?" The housekeeper followed Matthew into the hallway, closing Emma's door partially behind her. Though they spoke in hushed tones, Emma could still hear their conversation. "She was being auctioned off by her stepfather in town," Matthew explained quietly. "I intervened." "Good Lord," Mrs. Holloway breathed. "In this day and age." "She needs a safe place, honest work, and time to find her footing," Matthew continued. "I thought of our need for help here." "You did right," Mrs. Holloway assured him. "Don't worry, I'll look after her properly." "Thank you," Matthew said, relief evident in his voice. "I'll be in the south pasture with the men if you need anything." Their footsteps retreated, leaving Emma alone to absorb everything that had happened. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the clean quilt. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt a small spark of hope. Whatever Matthew's reasons for helping her, she was grateful beyond words for this chance at a new beginning. Emma spent that first evening helping Mrs. Holloway prepare dinner for the ranch hands, a hearty meal of beef stew, cornbread, and apple pie that the men devoured with appreciation. The 5 ranch hands ate at a separate table in the kitchen, while Matthew took his meal in the dining room. "Mr. Garrison prefers his privacy," Mrs. Holloway explained when Emma questioned the arrangement. "Been that way since he arrived. The men don't mind, they're more comfortable talking freely among themselves anyway." As they cleaned up after the meal, Mrs. Holloway shared more about the ranch and its operation. "We run about 300 head of cattle, mostly Herefords. Mr. Garrison's building a good reputation for quality stock. The men are a decent sort. Frank's the foreman, been here since the beginning. The others are Miguel, brothers Josiah and Thomas, and young Billy, who's just learning the ropes." "And Matthew, Mr. Garrison has owned this place for 2 years?" Emma asked, carefully drying the dishes Mrs. Holloway washed. The housekeeper nodded. "Bought it from old man Webster when he decided to move back east. Place was run down then. Mr. Garrison has worked hard to build it up. She handed Emma another plate. He's a fair employer, pays well, expects honest work in return, keeps to himself mostly, but he's got his reasons, I expect. What reasons? Emma couldn't help asking. Mrs. Holloway gave her a measured look. Not my place to say, even if I knew for certain. We all have our burdens to bear. She changed the subject smoothly. Tomorrow I'll show you your regular duties. We serve breakfast at 5:30 for the men, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. In between, there's cleaning, laundry, baking, and tending the kitchen garden. Emma nodded, understanding she wouldn't learn more about her mysterious benefactor tonight. I'm looking forward to starting properly tomorrow. Later, lying in her new bed, Emma stared at the unfamiliar ceiling and contemplated the extraordinary turn her life had taken in just one day. This morning, she had awakened facing a future of servitude to whoever purchased her. Tonight, she was free, employed, and safer than she'd been in months. All because a stranger had decided to intervene. Matthew Garrison was an enigma, a man who clearly carried painful memories, yet used them as motivation to help others, rather than turning bitter. Emma found herself intensely curious about him, even as she reminded herself that her position here was purely professional. He was her employer, nothing more. Still, as she drifted toward sleep, his face appeared in her mind, those serious gray eyes that had looked at her with respect rather than ownership, the way he'd stood between her and danger without hesitation. In the space of a single day, he had become the most significant person in her life, yet she knew almost nothing about him. Tomorrow, Emma promised herself as sleep claimed her, she would begin to learn more about the cowboy who had bought her freedom. The next few weeks established a comfortable routine. Emma rose early each morning to help Mrs. Holloway prepare breakfast for the hungry ranch hands. Matthew typically ate earlier, taking his meal quickly before heading out to work alongside his men. Emma saw little of him during the day, as he was constantly busy with ranch operations. She threw herself into her new duties with enthusiasm, grateful for meaningful work and fair treatment. The house, while large, was well maintained, and Mrs. Holloway was an excellent teacher who appreciated Emma's willingness to learn. "You've got a good hand with pastry," the housekeeper commented one afternoon as they prepared pies for dinner. "Your mother taught you well." "She did," Emma agreed, rolling out dough with practiced motions. "Cooking was something we enjoyed together." "You miss her," Mrs. Holloway observed. Emma nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. "Every day, she would have hated what Jacob tried to do to me." "Some men show their true colors only after they've secured what they want," Mrs. Holloway said wisely. "Your mother might not have seen his nature before it was too late." "Perhaps," Emma conceded, though part of her had always wondered why her gentle mother had married such a harsh man. As Emma worked in the kitchen garden one warm morning, pulling weeds from between neat rows of vegetables, she became aware of someone watching her. Looking up, she saw Matthew leaning against the garden fence, his expression unreadable. "Good morning," she said, pushing a strand of hair from her face. "Morning," he replied. "Mrs. Holloway says you're settling in well." Emma smiled. "I am, thank you again for the opportunity." Matthew shifted slightly, appearing almost uncomfortable with her gratitude. "The work suits you then?" "Very much so," she assured him. "Mrs. Holloway is an excellent teacher and the work is satisfying." She hesitated, then added, "I rarely see you at meals anymore. Been busy with the spring calves," he explained. "Taking my meals earlier or later, depending on the work." Emma sensed there was more to his absence than just the demands of ranching, but she didn't press. Instead, she asked, "Is there anything specific you'd like from the garden for upcoming meals? I'm planning what to harvest this week." Something in Matthew's expression softened. "My mother used to grow green beans. If there are any ready, I wouldn't mind some." "There are," Emma confirmed, pleased to have found something he might enjoy. "I'll make sure to include them at dinner." He nodded, seeming about to say something more when Frank, the foreman, called to him from the barn. "Boss, that new bull's acting up again." "Coming," Matthew called back, then tipped his hat slightly to Emma. "Thank you, Miss Keller." "Emma," she reminded him gently. "You said we should use given names." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Emma, then." With that, he turned and strode toward the barn, his long legs covering the ground quickly. That evening, Emma took special care with the green beans, preparing them the way her mother had taught her, with bacon and onions. When she brought the serving dish to the dining room, she found Matthew already seated at the table, contrary to his recent habit of eating separately from the household. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you'd prepared green beans," he said by way of explanation when she raised a questioning eyebrow. "I hope you enjoy them," Emma replied, setting the dish on the table. To her surprise, Matthew asked, "Would you join me for dinner this evening? There are some ranch matters I'd like to discuss." Emma glanced toward the kitchen where Mrs. Holloway was serving the ranch hands. "If Mrs. Holloway can manage without me." "Go on," the housekeeper called, having overheard. "I've got things well in hand here." Somewhat nervously, Emma took a seat across from Matthew. He served her a portion of roast beef before helping himself, his manners impeccable despite his rugged appearance. "The beans are exactly as I remember," he said after tasting them. "My compliments." "Thank you," Emma replied, pleased by his approval. "You mentioned ranch matters," Matthew nodded, setting down his fork. "I'll be traveling to Boise next week on business, purchasing some new breeding stock. I'll be gone about 10 days. He hesitated slightly. "I wanted to ensure you're comfortable here before I left, that you feel safe." Emma understood his concern. "I am, truly. Mrs. Holloway has been wonderfully kind and the men have been respectful." "Good," Matthew said, seeming relieved. "Frank will oversee things while I'm gone. If you need anything or if there's any trouble, he'll handle it." "I'm sure everything will be fine," Emma assured him, "but thank you for your concern." They ate in companionable silence for a few moments before Emma gathered her courage to ask a question that had been on her mind. "May I ask about your sister, the one you mentioned in town?" Matthew's expression closed immediately, his jaw tightening. "What about her?" I wanted to express my condolences properly," Emma said softly, "and perhaps to understand better why you helped me." For a long moment, Matthew was silent, his gaze fixed on some middle distance. Just as Emma began to regret her question, he spoke. Her name was Mary. "She was 17 when our parents died. Influenza took them both within days of each other. I was away, working cattle in Texas." His voice was low, controlled. "By the time word reached me and I returned home, our uncle had arranged her marriage to a man 30 years her senior, a wealthy businessman who'd been kind enough to take on a penniless orphan girl." Emma's heart ached at the bitterness in his voice. "I was 22, with no legal right to interfere in what was considered a proper arrangement. Mary begged me to help her, but the law was on our uncle's side." Matthew's hand tightened around his fork. "I tried to find another solution, but before I could, the wedding took place. Her husband took her to Chicago." He fell silent again, and Emma waited patiently, sensing he needed to tell this story at his own pace. 6 months later, I received a letter from her, smuggled out with the help of a sympathetic servant. She wrote that he was cruel, that she feared for her life." The controlled facade cracked slightly. "I left immediately for Chicago, but by the time I arrived, it was too late. He'd beaten her severely after discovering her attempt to contact me. She died of her injuries the day before I reached them." "I'm so sorry," Emma whispered, blinking back tears. "The law called it a tragic accident," Matthew continued, his voice hard. "His money and position protected him. I couldn't accept that." He looked directly at Emma for the first time since beginning his story. "I ensured he faced consequences, though not through legal channels. Afterward, I couldn't stay in that part of the country." Emma understood what he wasn't saying, that he had taken justice into his own hands. Rather than feeling frightened by this revelation, she felt a strange sense of respect for his loyalty to his sister. "So you came west," she said. Matthew nodded. "Spent some years drifting, taking whatever work came my way. Eventually realized I needed something more permanent, something meaningful. This ranch became that purpose." He set down his utensils. "When I saw what was happening to you in Lewiston, I couldn't stand by and let another young woman suffer a similar fate." "You saved me," Emma said simply. "I can never repay that debt." "There's no debt," Matthew insisted. "I just did what any decent person should have done." But they both knew that wasn't true. Plenty of decent people had stood by in the town square that day, unwilling to interfere. After dinner, Matthew excused himself to work on ranch accounts in his study. Emma helped Mrs. Holloway clean up, her mind full of Matthew's story. His revelation explained so much about his character, his protectiveness, his reserve, his commitment to doing what was right regardless of convention. The next morning, Emma rose even earlier than usual and went to the kitchen to prepare a special breakfast before Matthew departed for his daily work. When he entered, clearly surprised to find her there alone so early, she simply placed a plate before him, fresh biscuits, eggs, and ham steak. "What's this?" he asked, bewildered. "Just breakfast," Emma replied with a small smile. "A thank you for sharing your story with me last night. I know it wasn't easy." Matthew stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes, then he nodded once and sat down to eat. It wasn't much, this small gesture and his acceptance of it, but Emma felt something shift between them, a new understanding, perhaps even the beginning of friendship. The morning of Matthew's departure for boys dawned clear and cool. Emma rose early to prepare his traveling provisions, sandwiches, jerky, and a small apple pie carefully wrapped in a clean cloth. "This is far more than I need," Matthew protested when he saw the food she'd packed. "Better too much than too little," Emma replied practically. "The journey to Boise takes 2 days each way, doesn't it?" "Yes, but there are towns along the route," he reminded her, though he accepted the provisions with evident appreciation. Frank had brought Matthew's horse around to the front of the house, a tall, powerful bay gelding that stood patiently as Matthew secured his saddlebags and bedroll. "Remember, anything you need, see Frank," Matthew told Emma as he prepared to mount. "And Mrs. Holloway knows how to reach me in Boise if there's an emergency." "We'll be fine," Emma assured him. "Safe travels." Matthew swung into the saddle with easy grace. He tipped his hat to Emma and Mrs. Holloway, then turned his horse toward the main road and rode away, his straight-backed silhouette gradually diminishing in the distance. Emma was surprised by the sense of loss she felt watching him go. In the short time she'd known him, Matthew Garrison had come to represent safety and new beginnings. His absence left a noticeable void in the household. The days passed predictably. Emma fell into a comfortable rhythm with Mrs. Holloway, the two women working efficiently together to keep the ranch house running smoothly, and the men well fed. Frank reported daily on ranch operations, a responsibility he took seriously in Matthew's absence. On the 5th day after Matthew's departure, Emma was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when the sound of approaching horses caught her attention. Shading her eyes against the midday sun, she saw 3 riders approaching from the direction of Lewiston. Her heart stuttered when she recognized Jacob Keller and his sons. "Mrs. Holloway," she called urgently, hurrying toward the house. "My stepfather's coming." The housekeeper appeared on the back porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Are you certain?" "Yes," Emma confirmed, glancing nervously over her shoulder. The riders were drawing closer. "Him and both my stepbrothers." Mrs. Holloway's expression hardened. "Get inside. I'll send Billy for Frank and the others." Emma retreated to the house, watching through the window as the young ranch hand sprinted toward the pasture where Frank and the other men were working. Mrs. Holloway stood on the porch, her stance formidable despite her age and size. Jacob and his sons reached the yard and dismounted, their movements unsteady. Even from a distance, Emma could tell they'd been drinking. "Where's the girl?" Jacob demanded loudly. "If you're referring to Miss Keller, she's not your concern anymore," Mrs. Holloway replied firmly. "Mr. Garrison settled that matter weeks ago." "Garrison ain't here," Bill Keller said with a sneer. "Saw him riding toward Boys' Day before yesterday." Emma's stomach dropped. They must have been watching the ranch, waiting for Matthew to leave. "This is private property, Mrs. Holloway said, standing her ground. "I suggest you gentlemen leave immediately." Tom Keller laughed unpleasantly. "We ain't leaving without what's ours. That girl belongs to our family." "She belongs to no one but herself," Mrs. Holloway retorted. Jacob stepped closer to the porch, his expression menacing. "Look here, old woman. Either you fetch Emma, or we'll come in and get her ourselves." Frank and the other ranch hands appeared from the direction of the pastures, riding hard. Emma felt a surge of relief at the sight of them. "Everything all right, Mrs. Holloway?" Frank called as they approached, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered pistol. Jacob and his sons turned, clearly surprised by the arrival of the ranch hands. Though they outnumbered Jacob's group, Emma knew the situation could easily turn violent. Her stepfather had a notoriously quick temper, especially when drinking. "These men were just leaving," Mrs. Holloway said pointedly, Jacob's face flushed with anger. "This ain't over. That girl is my property by law. Being my stepdaughter and unmarried, I got rights." "Your rights were sold to Mr. Garrison for $300, Frank said coldly. "Now I suggest you mount up and ride out while you still can." For a tense moment, it seemed Jacob might challenge them. Then, with a muttered curse, he turned to his sons. "Come on. We'll settle this another time." As they mounted their horses, Jacob looked directly at the house, somehow finding Emma behind the window. "This ain't over, girl," he shouted. "You'll come crawling back when Garrison tires of you." Emma stood frozen until the three men had ridden away, her hands trembling slightly. Mrs. Holloway came inside, her face lined with concern. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked, placing a comforting hand on Emma's arm. "Yes," Emma said, though her voice wavered. "Do you think they'll come back?" Mrs. Holloway's expression was grim. "Frank will keep men watching the property, just in case, but they're cowards at heart, all bluster when they think they have the advantage." That evening, Emma found it difficult to concentrate on her duties, jumping at every sound from outside. After dinner, Frank stationed 2 men near the house for the night, a precaution that both reassured and unsettled her. "Should we send word to Mr. Garrison?" Emma asked Mrs. Holloway as they prepared for bed. The housekeeper considered the question. "He'd want to know, certainly. But he's in the middle of important business, and we've handled the situation for now." She patted Emma's hand. "Let's give it a day or two. If there's any further trouble, we'll send Billy to Boys with a message." Emma nodded, though sleep eluded her that night. Every creak of the house, every distant sound from the property set her nerves on edge. By morning, dark circles shadowed her eyes, but there had been no sign of Jacob or his sons returning. 3 more days passed without incident. The ranch hands remained vigilant, but gradually, the atmosphere of tension began to ease. Emma started to believe that perhaps Jacob had given up, recognizing that she was well protected even in Matthew's absence. Then, on the 9th day after Matthew's departure, when he was expected back the following afternoon, disaster struck. Emma was in the kitchen garden, harvesting vegetables for dinner, when she smelled smoke. Looking up, she saw dark plumes rising from the direction of the north pasture. "Fire!" She shouted, dropping her basket and running toward the house. "Mrs. Holloway, fire in the north pasture," the warning spread quickly. Ranch hands mounted horses and rode toward the smoke while others gathered buckets and tools. Frank organized the response with calm efficiency, but his expression was grim. "It's spreading fast with this wind," he told Mrs. Holloway and Emma, "and it's no accident that pasture is nowhere near any campfire or lightning strike." "Jacob," Emma whispered, feeling sick. Frank nodded grimly. "Most likely. Perfect distraction, get us all fighting the fire while they try something else." As if summoned by his words, the sound of breaking glass came from the front of the house. Emma and Mrs. Holloway turned to see Jacob and his sons forcing their way through a shattered window. "Inside, both of you," Frank ordered, drawing his pistol. "Lock the doors, I'll send Miguel to help." Mrs. Holloway pulled Emma toward the back door of the house. They barely made it inside before Jacob's voice boomed through the front rooms. "Emma, get out here, girl. Time to come home, Mrs." Holloway pushed Emma toward the stairs. "Go to my room," she whispered urgently. "There's a shotgun in the wardrobe. Get it and stay hidden." "What about you?" Emma asked, terrified for the older woman. "I'll stall them." "Go." Emma raced up the stairs as quietly as possible, hearing Mrs. Holloway confront the intruders below. "This is breaking and entering," the housekeeper said firmly. "The sheriff won't look kindly on that, especially with the fire you've set." "Shut your mouth, old woman," Jacob snarled. "Where is she?" "Gone," Mrs. Holloway lied. "Mr. Garrison took her with him to Boys." Emma reached Mrs. Holloway's room and found the shotgun exactly where she'd said. It was heavy in Emma's inexperienced hands, but she checked that it was loaded as her father had taught her long ago. Taking a position near the doorway, she listened to the confrontation downstairs. "You're lying," Tom's voice accused. "We've been watching. She's here." The sound of a slap echoed through the house, followed by Mrs. Holloway's pained cry. Emma's hands tightened on the shotgun. "How dare they hurt the kind woman who had taken her in? Check upstairs," Jacob ordered one of his sons. "She's hiding somewhere." Heavy footsteps started up the stairs. Emma's heart hammered in her chest as she raised the shotgun, praying she wouldn't have to use it but determined to protect herself if necessary. Bill Keller appeared at the top of the stairs, his gaze sweeping the hallway. When he turned toward Mrs. Holloway's room, Emma stepped into the doorway, the shotgun aimed steadily at his chest. "Don't come any closer," she warned, her voice remarkably calm despite her terror. Bill froze, his eyes widening at the sight of the weapon. "Pa," he called down. "Found her, she's got a gun." "Put that down, girl," Jacob called up the stairs. "You don't know how to use it." "My father taught me to shoot before I could ride," Emma replied, the half-truth giving her confidence. "Now all of you are going to leave this house. Mrs. Holloway, come up here, please." "She ain't going nowhere," Jacob growled. There was a scuffling sound and Mrs. Holloway gasped in pain. "Let her go," Emma demanded, panic rising. "You come down, we'll let her go," Jacob countered. "Otherwise, we'll see how much damage these old bones can take before they break." Emma was trapped in an impossible position. If she went downstairs, she'd be at their mercy. If she didn't, Mrs. Holloway would suffer. The sound of galloping hooves outside provided a moment's hope had Frank and Miguel returned, but Jacob's triumphant laugh dashed that hope. "That'll be our friends," he said smugly. "Got some boys from town to help with the fire. Keep your ranch hands good and busy while we settle our family business." Emma's mind raced desperately for a solution. The shotgun gave her some advantage, but she couldn't hold off 3 men indefinitely, especially if they had reinforcements. "Last chance, Emma," Jacob called up. "Come down now or the old lady gets hurt bad." A commotion erupted downstairs, shouting, the sound of something heavy falling, a man's pained yell. Then, cutting through it all, a voice that sent relief flooding through Emma's body. "Let her go, Keller." Matthew had returned. Keeping the shotgun trained on Bill, who remained frozen at the top of the stairs, Emma listened to the confrontation below. "Garrison," Jacob spat. "This ain't your business, family matter." "You're in my house, threatening my employees," Matthew replied, his voice deadly calm. "That makes it my business." "We outnumber you," Jacob blustered. "Do you?" Matthew asked mildly. "Your friends from town just ran into my ranch hands returning from the fire. They've wisely decided to reconsider their loyalties." There was a moment of tense silence. "Bill." Jacob finally called up. "Get down here." Bill backed slowly toward the stairs, his eyes never leaving the shotgun in Emma's hands. When he disappeared from view, Emma moved carefully to the top of the stairs, maintaining her defensive position while trying to see what was happening below. Matthew stood in the entryway, his gun drawn and pointed at Jacob, who still held Mrs. Holloway by the arm. Tom was sprawled on the floor, clutching his shoulder and moaning softly. "Let Mrs. Holloway go," Matthew said again. "This ends now, Keller." Jacob's face was a mask of hate. "The girl belongs to me." "The girl belongs to herself," Matthew corrected. "Now, I won't ask again." Something in his tone, a quiet deadliness, must have finally penetrated Jacob's alcohol-fueled bravado. He released Mrs. Holloway's arm, pushing her roughly away. "Emma," Matthew called, never taking his eyes off Jacob, "are you hurt?" "No," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mrs. Holloway." "I'm all right, dear," the housekeeper assured her, rubbing her bruised arm. Frank and Miguel appeared in the doorway behind Matthew, their expressions grim as they took in the scene. "The fire's contained," Frank reported. "Found evidence it was deliberately set. Sheriff's on his way from town. One of those hired hands confessed everything when we caught him." Jacob paled visibly at this news. "Take these men outside," Matthew instructed. "The sheriff can deal with them when he arrives." As Frank and Miguel moved to escort Jacob and his sons out, Matthew finally looked up at Emma, still standing at the top of the stairs with the shotgun. Something flickered in his eyes, concern, relief, and something deeper that Emma couldn't quite name. "You can put that down now," he said gently. "It's over." Emma lowered the weapon, suddenly aware of how badly her arms were shaking. Matthew climbed the stairs quickly, taking the shotgun from her trembling hands. "You're safe," he said quietly. "I've got you." The simple assurance broke the dam of Emma's composure. Tears flooded her eyes, and before she could stop herself, she stepped forward into Matthew's embrace, burying her face against his chest. After a moment's hesitation, his arms came around her, strong and secure. "I was so frightened," she confessed against his shirt. "When they hurt Mrs. Holloway, Matthew soothed. "You did well. You protected yourself and held them off until help arrived." His hand moved gently against her back. "I'm sorry I wasn't here when they came." Emma drew back slightly, wiping at her tears. "You couldn't have known, but how did you return so early?" "We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." A faint smile touched Matthew's lips. "Finished my business faster than anticipated. Something told me I should get back to the ranch." The smile faded. "Good thing I listened to that instinct." Mrs. Holloway had climbed the stairs behind them. "Indeed," she agreed. "Your timing couldn't have been better, Mr. Garrison." Matthew's attention shifted to the housekeeper's bruised face. "You need to see to that, Martha. Emma can help you," reminded of Mrs. Holloway's injuries. Emma stepped back from Matthew's embrace, embarrassed by her emotional display. "Of course, let me get some cold compresses." As she moved toward the bathroom, Matthew caught her hand briefly. "We'll talk later," he said softly, a promise in his gray eyes that made Emma's heart beat faster despite the chaos of the day. Sheriff Dawson arrived an hour later, taking Jacob and his sons into custody on multiple charges: arson, breaking and entering, assault, and attempted kidnapping. The evidence was overwhelming, especially with the testimony of the hired men who'd helped set the fire. "They'll be facing serious prison time," the sheriff told Matthew as they stood on the porch. "Won't be troubling you or Miss Keller again for many years, if ever." "Good," Matthew said simply. "I want restraining orders as well, for when they do eventually get out." The sheriff nodded. "Already planning on it." He glanced toward the house, where Emma was visible through the window, helping Mrs. Holloway prepare dinner despite the day's trauma. "She's lucky you came along when you did, back in Lewiston." Matthew's expression remained neutral. "It was the right thing to do." "Most men wouldn't have gotten involved," Sheriff Dawson observed shrewdly. "I'm not most men," Matthew replied, ending the conversation by turning toward the barn where his ranch hands were assessing the damage from the fire. That evening, after the sheriff had departed with his prisoners, and the ranch had settled into an uneasy calm, Emma found herself alone with Matthew on the front porch. Mrs. Holloway had retired early, understandably exhausted by the day's events. They sat side by side on the porch swing, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. The spring night was cool but not uncomfortable, with the scent of pine and distant smoke still lingering in the air. "The fire damage isn't as bad as it could have been," Matthew said, breaking the companionable silence. "We lost some fencing and about 10 acres of grazing land, but no livestock." "That's something to be grateful for," Emma replied. "Indeed." Another silence fell between them, this one laden with unspoken thoughts. "I should thank you," Emma finally said. "Again, for saving me. Again." Matthew shook his head slightly. "You were doing a fine job of saving yourself when I arrived. That was some standoff you created with the shotgun." Emma smiled faintly. "I was terrified the entire time. I've never actually fired a shotgun. My father only showed me the basics before he passed." "You bluffed well," Matthew said, admiration evident in his voice. "That takes courage, or desperation," Emma countered. "Sometimes they're the same thing." The swing creaked gently as they rocked, the rhythm soothing after the day's tension. "What will happen now?" Emma asked after another long silence. "The ranch will recover," Matthew replied. "The new cattle I purchased in Boise will arrive next week." "Life goes on." "And me?" Emma asked softly. "Now that the threat from Jacob is gone, do you still need me here?" Matthew turned to look at her directly, his expression serious in the fading light. "That depends on whether you want to stay." Emma's breath caught at the implication behind his words. "As your housekeeper's assistant." "At first, perhaps," Matthew said carefully, "but I had hoped, in time, you might consider a different position." Emma's heart began to race. "What position would that be?" Matthew took her hand gently in his. Emma, I never expected to find someone who would make me want to open my heart again. After Mary's death, I thought that part of me was gone forever. His thumb traced a soft pattern on her palm. But these past weeks, watching you build a new life here, seeing your strength and kindness. I've begun to hope again. Emma stared at their joined hands, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Matthew, I'm not proposing marriage, he clarified quickly. Not yet. That would be too soon for both of us, but I am asking if you might consider allowing me to court you properly. To see if what I'm feeling, what I hope you might be feeling too, could grow into something more permanent. Emma looked up into his earnest gray eyes, seeing vulnerability there that he rarely showed to the world. The cowboy who had bought her freedom was now offering her something far more precious, his heart. I would like that very much, she whispered, squeezing his hand. I've felt drawn to you since that day in Lewiston, though I hardly dared admit it even to myself. Relief and joy transformed Matthew's usually serious face. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Emma responded shyly at first, then with growing confidence as warmth spread through her body. When they parted, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. We'll take this slowly, he promised. Get to know each other properly, no rushing. Emma smiled, happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. We have all the time in the world now. As summer bloomed across the Idaho countryside, Matthew courted Emma with a combination of old-fashioned formality and genuine affection that endeared him to her more each day. They rode together on Sunday afternoons, exploring the furthest reaches of the ranch property. He brought her wildflowers gathered during his daily work, and she baked his favorite desserts. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch swing, talking about their pasts, their hopes, their dreams for the future. Mrs. Holloway watched their blossoming romance with approving eyes, occasionally sharing knowing looks with Frank when the young couple thought no one was watching their tentative displays of affection. Never seen the boss so happy, Frank commented one day as he and Mrs. Holloway observed Matthew teaching Emma to shoot properly, his hands guiding hers on the rifle with tender care. About time, Mrs. Holloway replied. That man's carried darkness too long. She brings light to him. In late August, Matthew took Emma to Lewiston for the summer festival, her first return to town since the auction. She was nervous about facing the townsfolk, but Matthew remained steadfastly by her side, his presence a shield against curious stares and whispered comments. To Emma's surprise, many people welcomed her warmly, especially Mrs. Taylor from the general store, who embraced her like a long-lost daughter. We were all shocked by what your stepfather did, Mrs. Taylor confided. Most folks were too afraid of him to speak up, but that doesn't make it right that we stood by. She patted Emma's hand. It's good to see you thriving, dear. As they strolled through the festival, Emma's hand tucked securely in Matthew's arm, they stopped to watch children playing games on the town green. A little girl with golden curls reminded Emma painfully of herself at that age, before her father's death had changed everything. Do you want children someday? She asked Matthew impulsively, then blushed at her own boldness. Matthew looked down at her, his expression softening. Yes, he said simply, very much so. That evening, as they drove the wagon back to the ranch under a canopy of stars, Matthew pulled to a stop at the top of the hill overlooking the property. In the moonlight, the ranch house glowed with welcoming warmth, smoke curling from the chimney into the night sky. Beautiful, isn't it? Matthew said, gazing at the scene below. Yes, Emma agreed. It feels like home now. Matthew turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I was hoping you'd say that. His voice was husky with emotion. Emma, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought joy and purpose into my world in ways I never thought possible. Emma's heart began to race as she realized what was happening. I love you, Matthew said simply. I want to spend my life with you building this ranch, raising a family, facing whatever comes together. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Emma Keller, will you marry me? Inside the box was a delicate gold ring with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds, elegant, understated, and perfect. Yes, Emma whispered, tears of joy blurring her vision. Yes, Matthew, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. They were married in October, when the aspen trees had turned golden and the mountains wore their first dusting of snow. The ceremony took place at the ranch, with Mrs. Holloway, Frank, and the other ranch hands in attendance, along with a few townspeople who had become friends. Sheriff Dawson stood as Matthew's best man, while Mrs. Taylor attended Emma. As they spoke their vows beneath an arch of autumn flowers, Emma marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terror of that auction block to the joy of this wedding day, all because one man had refused to stand by while injustice occurred. I, Emma, take you, Matthew, to be my husband, she said clearly, her eyes never leaving his. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. Matthew's hands tightened around hers as he repeated the same vows, his deep voice steady and sure. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the gathered guests erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration continued late into the evening, with music and dancing in the decorated barn. As Matthew twirled Emma in a lively dance, she caught glimpses of their friends and chosen family, Mrs. Holloway wiping away happy tears, Frank raising a toast with the other ranch hands, Mrs. Taylor chatting animatedly with the minister. Happy, Mrs. Garrison? Matthew asked, pulling her close as the music slowed. Emma smiled up at him, her heart overflowing with love. Happier than I ever dreamed possible. Later, when they were finally alone in the master bedroom, now their bedroom, Matthew took her face gently between his hands. When I rode into Lewiston that day and saw what was happening in the town square, I had no idea my life was about to change forever, he said softly. I only knew I had to stop another injustice if I could. You gave me freedom, Emma replied, reaching up to touch his face. And then you gave me love. How can I ever thank you enough? By being happy, Matthew said simply. By building a life with me. By never forgetting that you are your own person, brave, strong, and free. I promise, Emma whispered against his lips as he lowered his mouth to hers. 5 years later, Emma stood on the porch of Garrison Ranch, watching as Matthew rode in from the pastures, their 3-year-old son Thomas perched proudly in front of him on the saddle. Behind them came Frank, now gray-haired but still the capable foreman, leading a string of horses back to the barn. Mama, Thomas called excitedly, waving with one hand while the other clutched the saddle horn. I helped Papa count the cows, did you now? Emma replied with a smile, descending the steps to meet them. And how many did you count? This many. Thomas held up 3 fingers solemnly. Matthew chuckled as he swung down from the saddle, then lifted his son to the ground. He got as far as 3 before getting distracted by a rabbit. Emma laughed, ruffling Thomas's dark hair so like his father's. Well, that's 3 more than yesterday. Matthew leaned down to kiss her, his eyes warm with love. How are my girls today? Restless, Emma replied, placing a hand on her rounded belly. Your daughter has been kicking up a storm all morning. That's my girl, Matthew said proudly, placing his larger hand over hers, strong like her mama. Thomas tugged at his father's pant leg. Can I go see Mrs. Holloway? She promised cookies. Wash your hands first, Emma reminded him. You've been with the horses. As their son raced toward the house, Matthew pulled Emma into a proper embrace. I missed you this morning, he murmured against her hair. You were only gone a few hours, she teased, though she'd missed him too. Too long, he insisted, kissing her again. The sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention. Sheriff Dawson was driving, with Mrs. Taylor beside him. The two had married last spring, to everyone's delight. Visitors, Emma observed. I'd better tell Mrs. Holloway to set extra places for dinner. I'll see to the horses, Matthew said, giving her one last quick kiss before heading toward the barn. As Emma walked back to the house, she paused to take in the scene around her, the thriving ranch, the extended family of friends and employees who had become so dear to them, the home she and Matthew had built together. The memory of that terrifying day in Lewiston's town square seemed distant now, like something from another life. From the worst day of her life had come everything good: her freedom, her husband, her children, her home. all because one man had refused to let injustice stand unchallenged. Inside the house, Thomas was already helping Mrs. Holloway, now more grandmother than housekeeper, to the little boy arrange cookies on a plate. The elderly woman looked up as Emma entered, her wise eyes taking in Emma's expression. "Counting your blessings again?" Mrs. Holloway asked knowingly. Emma smiled, resting one hand on her son's head and the other on her unborn daughter. "Every day," she confirmed. "Every single day." Through the window, she watched as Matthew greeted their visitors, his laugh carrying on the clear autumn air. He glanced toward the house, somehow sensing her gaze, and smiled that special smile reserved only for her. Emma Keller Garrison, once sold to the highest bidder, had found her true worth in the arms of the man who had set her free. Not her price, but her value as a woman, a wife, a mother, a partner. And in that knowledge she had found her greatest freedom of all.